I mean, this is a group of men that are now just hardened combat vets. And yet, there's no war. There's no end to this in sight, right? I mean, there's no end. Yeah, I guess if you looked at it from a strategic perspective, knowing what we know today, maybe you could say there's an end in sight. But if you know, you're barely surviving this stuff. You're barely surviving it. You know what the end is. I mean, you have to accept what the end is probably going to be. Mm-hmm. The end is probably going to be you're not going to live. In early November, we were told that the whole 1st Airborne Division was returning to England and the 1st Parachute Brigade would leave from Algiers at the end of the month. On the 29th of November, we shipped out of Algiers on the SS Samaria, happily heading for Liverpool. Now, one particular chap made a popular appearance. Peter, the battalion's unofficial, lovable dog. Peter liked water and jumping from planes and was the only parachute dog on record. At first, he was owned by a lad named Topper Brown, and rumor had it they had both escaped from Dunkirk in 1940. Peter was a marvel and could do almost anything asked of him, never forgetting a trick. Put a stone on his nose and back away, and he'd remain motionless. But at a given command, he would toss and catch that stone. Water was his god. There had been static tanks 8 feet deep at Bulford into which a stone could be thrown. Peter would retrieve it in no time and then sit patiently, waiting for another run. When we had set off for North Africa in October the previous year, he had been smuggled aboard the Arundel Castle, everyone helping in the scheming to get him aboard and keep him fed, exercised, and comfortable. He had been left behind in Algeria in the good care of the cooks and the rear echelon party when we went on to meet the enemy in Tunisia, where Topper Brown was taken prisoner and sadly never heard of again. Corporal Jim Nash, the battalion hairdresser of our company, then took care of Peter. And it was at Matemore in Algeria during training for the Sicily operation that Jim took him up for his first jump from an aircraft. A special bag had been made and was fixed to Jim's front with a hole at the top for Peter's head to protrude. They made a perfect landing, Peter running off as happy as Larry, wagging his tail. After various other escapades, Peter returned to Algiers and was smuggled aboard the Samaria, where he was having a great time until the locker door of his hiding place was accidentally left unsecured during one of our boat drill procedures, and he ventured out on his own. He was found wandering below by the ship's officer, who ordered him to be put over the side. We were just 2 days out from Liverpool. The men were furious, and it was just as well that the officer responsible could not be found, as a roving band of justice-seeking paras could not have been expected to be lenient. As far as Peter was concerned, he had such enthusiasm for water that maybe it was fitting to end up in a sea grave, but we felt his loss. I don't mind admitting that we fighting men had a soft side, even after all we'd seen and done, perhaps especially after all we'd seen and done. I wrote Peter a poem entitled Epitaph to a Friend. Its last verse as follows: Peter made us happy and carefree. He had no military apparel. He made just 2 jumps. His grave is the sea. His wings truly earned, and the name Red Devil. Kind of a theme that we see come up from time to time. The attachment that soldiers can get to these dogs that they come across at some point. And unfortunately, a recurring theme is some rear echelon person that doesn't understand killing those animals. And I also thought it was, it's interesting, that line, I don't mind admitting that we fighting men had a soft side even after all we'd seen and done. And then he says, perhaps especially after all we'd seen and done. That's something that is, I think that's absolutely true. There's no better, the sunset looks a million times, infinitely better when you know the sacrifices that have been made to see the sunset. The white bed sheets that you get to sleep on, you appreciate infinitely more when you've been sleeping in the dirt for 6 months. And it goes on and on and on. And so when you see the depravity that human beings are capable of, well, that can actually expose the fact that you really can cherish a innocent little dog. And these guys arrive back home, get stationed. The 1st Battalion gets stationed at Grimsthorpe Castle. And at this point, they know something really big is in the air. And he says here, in August, men coming from our old training area of Tatton Park reported seeing thousands of tanks there, like a giant tank park. Sure enough, in mid-September, we were finally setting off somewhere. I checked over my gear, 1 gammon bomb, 2 .36 hand grenades, combined pick and shovel, webbing equipment with small pack, 2 ammunition pouches and bandolier with .303 ammunition, water bottle, mess tin, iron ration, field dressing, camouflage net scarf, triangle shape air recognition bright yellow silk scarf tied around the neck for ready for instant use, rifle, and an escape kit comprising of a silk map of Europe, a small button compass, and a strong file the size of a nail file. That was about it, except for a kit bag strapped to the leg and parachute plus Mae West life jacket in case we finished up in the drink. I felt like an overdue pregnant hippo and didn't know where to put anything else, though still I added 200 cigarettes, 2 bars of chocolate, and some boiled sweets. It's interesting, the yellow scarf for recognition, and he specifically says tied around the neck for instant use. And it's interesting, I always carried one. The basic reason why I always carried one is because I was a radioman when I was a young enlisted guy, and I used it at times. I had learned the value of it signaling helicopters and signaling boats in the jungle. Like and the weird thing is, when you're let's say you're in a boat in a river along the jungle, there's so much jungle to look at that it's really hard to see someone waving their hand. It seems so obvious when you're waving at a boat. Hey, I'm over here. First of all, they can't hear you because they're running engines, shooting machine guns. They can't hear you. And second, because they're looking at whatever, quarter mile or half a mile of green bush. They got this whole thing to try and find you, and you're in a green camouflage uniform, and you're waving your arm. They can't see you. So I would always have a aircraft panel is what we called them, aircraft signaling panel, which is just bright fluorescent orange, and I could whip that thing out really quickly, and then you become a lot more visible. Same thing with the aircraft overhead. Well, in Ramadi, it didn't take long before everyone was carrying that. Yeah. And they were carrying big ones too, like a platoon or like an element that was going in a building would have a big giant one that you could hang out a window. Everyone, we are here. Hey, friendly forces, we are here. Gotcha. So even this guy, World War II, that bright yellow silk scarf, important signaling device at the hand. He says, I wondered how the rest of the men were going to fare on this hop. I was just getting used to the new faces, like Frankie Panzer Manzer, Bill Silberry, Terry Brace, Dick Bingley, Dolly Gray, Major Perrin Brown, Sid Oxley, Gov Beach, with his top hat. The Germans will surrender in surprise if he takes them with that, I thought. Joe McReady, Patty McCormick, and Captain Joe Gardner. I just had to read those names for 2 reasons. Number one, because they sound like the best bunch of characters you could ever hang around. And also, so everyone remembers that All these people that we're talking about, they're all people. Unfortunately, Sergeant Busty Everett had fallen ill and died at Bourne. We were from all over the country and beyond, and on the whole, one big happy family. It was daylight when we clambered into trucks and headed toward the aerodrome at Barkston Hall. Everyone was tense, but ready to go, come what may. He goes on here, our objective was to capture and hold the bridge straddling the Rhine at Arnhem. My 1st Parachute Battalion was to seize the high ground to the north. Our escorting Typhoon, Spitfire, and Mustang fighters were weaving between the Dakotas and gliders as we crossed the English Channel. Tension began to mount in my plane. We approached land on the other side and could see the area that had been flooded to try and stop or impede the advance of our land forces. I was admiring the landscape when the order rang out. Action stations, hook up, green light, on, go. Being number 13, I had a few long seconds to wait as I shuffled forward. Then I felt a slight pat on my parachute back and again found myself tumbling out of the doorway into that familiar open void. My parachute opened once more obediently, and I drifted down to earth without difficulty. After a good 3-point landing, I was now in enemy-occupied territory. Except for the occasional machine gun fire and some blasting from enemy machine gun emplacements, the landing had been unopposed, and the whole dropping zone north of Heaslam was packed with gliders and discarded parachutes. Everyone soon collected themselves and rendezvoused at their respective points. The time was just after 1500 on Sunday, the 17th of September, 1944. The time was just after 1500 on Sunday the 17th of September, 1944. Leaving the drop zone, we made our way quickly along the track, running alongside the wood west of Wolfhees and south of the railway. The end of the track lined up with a road running parallel to the railway. Turning right here and then over the road onto the railway sidewalk, we nosed our way toward Wolfhees Station. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion up ahead and some machine gun fire. And now this is when things start to get hot. Our company, still up front, became engaged in a fierce battle, facing armored cars, mortars, and machine guns. It was getting dark now. The whole battalion lay doggo for a while to try to avoid further detection. We lay up in the woods for some hours, pushing on occasionally but cautiously. At one point in time, unbeknown to the enemy, they completely surrounded us. In the semi-dark, so here they are, they're kind of like laid up, they're not trying to move too much. In the semi-dark, we passed down winding lanes. This is when they start pushing forward through the woods and along the south side of the road. We were now about 5 miles from the Arnhem Bridge, and so far, luck had been with us. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, there were sounds of battle ahead, apparently coming from an area northeast of Lichtenbeek. On arriving there at about 0500, we found that the leading companies had met fierce opposition and had suffered heavily. Then, with no reason given at the time, the original plan to go for the high ground north of Arnhem was changed, and we instead turned south towards Mariendal and Oosterbeek, some 2 miles from the bridge. At 0600, we entered Oosterbeek, where we met members of the Dutch underground movement who showed us the easiest route to the bridge. We were moving cautiously in a file, ready for action, and everything seemed a little bit too quiet. At 0630, as dawn was breaking, we moved up into a built-up area, and then it started. The enemy had been busy overnight preparing gun emplacements, taking up positions at vantage points, posting snipers, and concealing tanks and SP guns. German gunfire shattered the peace, and I darted for cover and took up position in the neatly laid out garden of a nearby house. More firing came from the house direction. With 2 other men, I ran around the back of the house and fired at 2 Germans in the shrubbery. They must have had their chips. With 2 other men, I ran around the back of the house and fired at 2 Germans in the shrubbery. They must have had their chips amid the smoke and fire of machine guns, SP guns, and 6